What's going on, hockey fans? Welcome back to Hockey 101. It's been a bit. We've taken some time off to collect ourselves, to get a couple of things done on the side. We've all had to kind of regroup ourselves and, more importantly, wait and see what happened as those big dates that we talked about for a long time came and went. We're going to get into a little bit of the data, a little bit of what's to come next. But first, I have to introduce two people on this show. The first man I'm going to introduce, I would like to congratulate him as the new co-owner of 3U Quintuple A Hockey League. It's Dan K. Dan, I know we're charging $20,000 per skater. We didn't tell people about the $5,000 tryout fee, but I mean, people are used to that at this point. It's 3U hockey. How can you not get excited?
And here's the thing, Lucas. I understand that the word tuitions and what we're charging these 3 and under future NHL stars, but I like to think of it as free to play either way, because what we're providing these kids, the value, tough to put a price tag on.
100%.
Yes. Might some have said we made the post on April Fool's and this might all be a joke? You could say that, Lucas, but I'm excited to see how this thing really pans out.
I think so too. Well, with the post, you're seeing the post right now. Future Lucas, put the graphic up on the screen so people can see what we're talking about. And then I would not be able to start Hockey 101 without introducing a man who, when it comes to 3U hockey, doesn't even remember what it's like to be 30U, let alone 3U. It's the elder of the podcast who brings with him sage wisdom and not so sage advice from time to time. It's Bob Turo. Bob, welcome back to the show.
God, it's been a while, guys. It's time that the dates have arrived that we've all talked about. It's going to be so exciting in the next 2-3 months. I can't wait to get at it. Can we talk some NHL for a bit?
Yeah, and Bob, I know you wanted to talk about this as we kind of kick this off. We continue to talk about the CHL, about NCAA hockey, about U.S. juniors. We talk about who's going to feed the game at the next level, the professional ranks, the NHL. I mean, what you have to look at right now, I guess, is just the game being played up there. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing from around the NHL, standing scores. Where are we at right now at this point?
It's exciting. Like there's 8, 9, 10, 11 games left for all the teams. I'm watching the games tonight. The Panthers are up 2-1 on the Canadians. The Canadians hold the last wild card spot in the East. I mean, will that go to overtime and will there be a loser point? The Blue Jackets fighting for their lives. They're up 8-4 on that powerhouse, the Nashville Predators. The Islanders and the Red Wings, it's kind of their last chance right now. The Islanders lost the other night to Tampa. They went back to Long Island tonight. And at the end of 2, it's the Islanders down 3-1 to the Lightning. And I don't want to say that pushes them out. But if they lose this game, they're going to almost have to run the table. And it's last chance for the Red Wings tonight, kind of in the same vein as the Islanders. What's interesting, and listen, we're talking about NHL because all the players we're looking at who's going to be feeding the NHL, but we never really talk about the NHL. And what you're looking at in the NHL right now is one new team for sure in the East is going to make the playoffs. It's going to be the Ottawa Senators unless they totally fold their tent. And it could be another. It could be the Canadians. It could be the Blue Jackets. We talked about the Red Wings and the Islanders. And then you take a look out west. Man, right now the way it is, the first round, it's the Stars against the Avalanche. That could be the Stanley Cup final. Yep. And Winnipeg's in first place in the Central. They've got a wagon with maybe the best goaltender except for probably Vasilevsky in Tampa. I mean, you look in the Pacific Division, Edmonton, 5-4-1 in their last 10. Maybe they'll be a wild card because Minnesota, who hasn't played with their best player for the longest period of time, is only 1 point behind them. But we kind of know who's going to be in there. It's going to be St. Louis for sure, unless they fold. I mean, they're 5 points up with games in hand on Vancouver and on Calgary. It's going to be interesting. There's nothing like the Stanley Cup playoffs. Nothing like it. I mean, I would make an argument to you guys that the college football playoffs this year were a bust. I mean, the games weren't that exciting early on. Anybody want to disagree with me there?
I would say a bust is a strong word just
Oh,
because I like anybody taking a new chance, right? Like I'll always give somebody a year. I gave the MLB new playoff system a year. I think by year two, the MLB playoff system is a bust, right? I will argue the new system to get to a World Series champion ain't the way to decide a baseball championship, right? I would say with some changes, some tweaks, I think the college football playoff, if you just get rid of the 1, 2, 3, 4 having to win a conference, how's Arizona State a 4 seed? How is Oregon getting the worst path to the final as the one overall? You fix that, I think it's not a bust. I think they bust adjacent, I'd give you.
okay. So let's put it this way. It's too strong a word. And it's certainly, if you're a business guy watching the podcast, wasn't a bust. It was nothing but a win because you had a whole bunch of new games, right?
Notre
So
Dame
maybe
in the
you're
final, too. A lot of
yeah,
money.
hey, maybe when you tweak it next year, the all the games are more competitive, and there were some competitive games, but it'll be better. Maybe there's nothing like the NCAA basketball tournament. Compare if we're going to compare it to the National Hockey League playoffs, but even this year, you know what we talk about with nil. There's no Cinderella story in the basketball playoff, in the basketball March Madness this year. It's all the top guns. And wasn't it all the top seeds that made it to the Final Four?
It was. And that's something that I think we'll get into even more kind of as a wrap up to the podcast is how basketball might be paving a way for sports like hockey at the NCAA level. But you look at it right now, NIL money and the business of sports is really bringing the cream to the top when it comes to the March Madness. You have all the 1 seeds in. You have 3 out of the 4 2 seeds in the Elite Eight. Only team to not be a 3 seed in Texas Tech. Not necessarily a mid-major sneaking on in. One of the least upset-filled March Madnesses in the last 30 years.
I mean, the Final Four is going to listen. The Final Four is going to be great. I mean, you had the best player in college basketball going to be in it. I mean, but I don't know. Stanley Cup playoffs, baby. There's nothing like it. It's a war of attrition to get to 16 games.
Yeah, and as you kind of talk about that Stanley Cup playoff race, you saw a team of the Rangers with a must-win in San Jose. They not only win the game, but I don't know if you heard about Macklin Celebrini, a guy whose name has been talked about in this podcast a bit. Not only does he lose that game to a New York Rangers squad in San Jose, but then the Rangers back up and hit his car. Absolutely Mac's car at the end of the game, leaving the building. So a tough night to be Macklin Celebrini. So we'll give him nothing but flowers tonight.
Was it a Tesla, Dan?
I don't think it was a Tesla. I don't think there was anything else behind it.
That's a pretty nice car you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it on the way out.
I think Macklin might be driving somewhere in a Lambo territory, the Bentley.
Guys, let's do some recap. All the way back to Pod 1. Where do NHL hockey players come from? And the numbers were very simple for the November 11th rosters in the National Hockey League. The CHL had 47.7% of the players that graduated from their league. The NCAA had 29.5%, and Europe had 22.8% of the players in the National Hockey League. Historically, the NCAA is exactly where they have been for the last 20 years. Europe is up. The CHL is down. And I don't want to focus on Europe right now. Let's focus, as we have been, online with our articles and everything, of the battle for the North American skater, or the European who's coming over, the European who's coming over to North America, who we consider to be a North American skater. It is clear before the rules that the NCAA model is not conducive to producing the most NHL players. If it was, they'd have the biggest percentage, the largest percentage in the National Hockey League. And why is that? When you only have 26 true freshmen in your league and you only have 58 true freshmen plus a year in your league, you're an older league. And so everything we've been leading up to is this going to change over time? And we've said from day one, will Division I go after the CHL 17 and 18-year-olds? And we're going to find out. As we go through these dates, we're going to find out what happens. All of the answers to those questions are going to come true or not true for the NCAA and the CHL. We're going to find out. So the second thing I want to talk to you guys about, Lucas, you can put that graphic up. First and second rounders from the 2024 draft. Why am I looking at the first and second rounders? Because the odds of the first rounders playing in the NHL are like 90-some%. And then it drops way down to something like 50% for the second rounders. And then it drops off the table, okay, for draft choices after that. So when you take a look at this and you see of the first and second rounders in the 2024 draft, there were 27 that came from the CHL last year. This is the old rules now. And if you add up the NCAA, the USHL, which typically the players went to the NCAA, the development program, typically they went to the NCAA, not in all cases, but let's count them as NCAA players. And the others, which would be the BCHL or the AJ players. If you total all of them up, you've got 18. So it's 27-18 was the score in 2024. You can go back as many years as you want. Maybe the score might be 29-16. Maybe the score might be a little bit closer. But the CHL is always winning the battle for the absolute best players, plain and simple. And if that doesn't change for the NCAA, they're going to be in big trouble.
And I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head there, Bob. The problem is, I think, also due to a radical change in such a short period of time, right? So you're asking institutions to make changes on a very short scale, institutions that are not used to even having to consider the possibility of making changes, right? It does feel like, in a sense, we're still stuck in the is anything wrong portion of the debate. Not us, because obviously we are completely fine with making changes, right? But it feels like the NCAA is still stuck in the is there a problem stage, where they should be halfway through the what are we going to do about it stage. Because I think it's obvious to a lot of people that things are moving very, very quickly right now, not just in hockey. They're happening in basketball. We talked about it in the beginning of the show. We're not going to get into it in a very deep way, but there are schools that are moving conferences without first recognizing that those conferences don't have hockey programs. There are schools that are moving from D1 to D2 and D3, or schools that are getting rid of their athletics altogether. It's rapidly changing. Yeah, in different sports.
In different sports, and who knows what's going to happen with hockey, right?
But I think it's an indicator that the alarm bells that need to have been going off, and I just don't know if that's happening yet.
Here's an argument that a couple of D1 coaches made to me 10 days ago. We're really good at developing late bloomers, and we're going to be getting a bunch of players from the CHL who are older. They're overages or last year juniors prior to their overage year, and we're going to really develop those players. And I think they're kidding themselves, because if it's true, our prediction that all the best 16 and 17-year-olds, and we'll find that out, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but if all the best 16 and 17-year-olds are going to the CHL, if the CHL keeps those kids through their 19-year-old year, the NCAA is going to be getting players that are after that group. It's going to be a disaster. It's not going to be 47-29 in 5 years from now. It's going to be 60-15. I'm not saying or suggesting for a second that the NCAA is not going to be producing NHL players if they don't change their business model. They will. But if you get to the buffet first, which is what the CHL is doing, you get all of the Chateaubriand and surf and lobster, and everybody else gets the hot dogs and wieners and beans. And sometimes hot dogs and wieners and beans, you want that. And sometimes it's a great meal, but it's not going to equate to more NHL hockey players. Here's the next thing.
He's steamrolling right past Chateaubriand, and I'm not going to let it happen.
Yeah. And
First of all,
yeah,
you kept flip-flopping between Canadian and American. They're really showing off your dual citizenship. But remember when I said you're far from 30 U hockey? Calling it Chateaubriand, you might be far from 55 U hockey, Bob.
And the other thing to add real quick, just in terms of your conversation on the NCAA side and not getting that Chateaubriand, as you called it, right?
Like, yes, of course.
It's your bigger problem continues to be that we're seeing, you talked about it, other institutions, St. Francis, Pennsylvania, who just went away from Division I sports the day after they were eliminated from March Madness. They make an announcement, we're going NCAA Division III. Their leader of the athletic department said, act fast now if you are schools like ourselves. Don't get caught holding the bag, right? They're getting out right now. The question starts to become for a sport like hockey. I know everyone listening here is a humongous hockey fan. We couldn't imagine the Stanley Cup playoffs not being the most exciting thing to watch in sports, or hockey being the biggest ticket in town. But I just had to go to ESPNU 3 different times on a Fubo TV account to watch 3 of the biggest hockey games of the year, because that's what ESPN thinks of this sport right now at the collegiate ranks, right? So if you do not get the Chateaubriand from Canada and you do not have it on your roster, where do those big railroad tycoons and monocle-wearing money havers send their NIL money? It's away from the ice. It goes elsewhere, and that is the biggest thing. Bob, I think you were trying to shake into folks' heads right now here on this side of the border, is the necessity not just to win this battle, to have the best hockey in the NCAA, to give people something to cheer for, something to root for, and give players that NCAA collegiate dream, but also to ensure that NCAA hockey survives in the world it lives in today, because it may just need that to keep collecting the nil money you need to compete against the CHL and what the USHL may become, just to try to compete with them.
Okay, we're going to take the agenda right now, and we're just going to rip it right up, okay? We're going right off the tracks. Anything happen in college football in the last couple of years? Oh, yeah. What is it, the Pac-10?
Yep.
Pac-12. Pac-12. Is it around anymore?
It's the Pac-2.
Hold on. Technically, the Pac-12 was the presenting conference of the San Francisco Regional and got all the money from that for presenting it. So they did get that money. Oregon State and Washington State were paid.
I mean, who would have thought teams would be playing in the conferences that they're playing in right now in football, right?
Yep.
My point is this, and it's backing up your point about acting right now, and it's taking a look at who was in the NCAA tournament this year. For the most part, it was what we call the Blue Bloods. And could it be that what happened in football might happen in hockey? Could it be that you might have an expanded Big Ten, and then the best of the rest? You take BU, you take BC, you take you take North Dakota, you take Denver, and that forms another conference, and then you have the rest. Like, I don't know what's going to happen here, guys. It's crazy time.
Yeah, I mean,
that could happen.
Yeah, look at money right now. Look at the SEC in college basketball. a record number of participants in March Madness. Yes, it's a bigger field than it was years and years ago, right? But you have 14 teams from the SEC serving in one March Madness tournament. You look at the Final Four: SEC, 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 ACC, right? You're talking about the top dogs are getting bigger, they're getting stronger, and they're being fed, and all the food is everyone else's bowl, right? That's what they're feeding on right now.
So if your hockey program is not one of the blue bloods and it's losing money, when it comes budget time, aren't people are looking at this, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying anybody's leaving anytime soon, but they better figure out a system that works for everybody before it only works for 20 teams. Can I put the agenda back together again?
Please do. Get some tape.
Go ahead. And I will make one quick point as you do that. And it is, the problem comes down to also the individual panic, right? We all hear these negative things about herd mentality, right? But what happens when the pack separates and goes in every direction? It's everybody for themselves. You make dumb decisions. You make panic decisions. You get rat-brained, right? You start thinking about, I'm just going to go to this conference with one of my travel partners. But then people from that conference go somewhere else. Or you sign up with a new travel partner and they get rid of their hockey team. Or because everybody else gets rat-brained and you try to stay true to your founding principle or whatever conference you're in, now you're left holding the bag, right? So without the collective action, without someone to go, everybody stop, here's what we're doing, you're going to end up with, yes, having a system that feeds 20 teams is bad, but having no system is going to end up being the worst option of that. And that is a possibility.
Go back to pod 3, I think it was. Who's the Roy Kramer? Who's the leader of college hockey? Well, we were talking about the narrative all the way through. Now, we're going to get into some dates right now that could organically change the narrative. But if you're going to win long term for college hockey, you better have your Roy Kramer who has the plan. And when they get down to that convention and all those coaches are down there and maybe some athletic directors are going to be there or should be there, they can spell out a plan for college hockey so that they can not lose teams, but have teams that are healthy financially, competitively, and growing where all of this money seems to be, which is in the SEC and pockets in California, ACC. I mean, I don't know where that guy is. Nope. Nobody's surfaced to this point in time. Let's talk about some dates. Date number 1, the end of the CHL season has happened. There are teams that have been eliminated from the WHL, the Ontario League, and the Quebec Maritimes League. And there are players on those rosters that have been eliminated. There will be more teams eliminated this weekend. 2 weekends from there will be more teams eliminated. And we've said from the get-go that any top-end players that are playing on CHL teams, there was no way through the course of the year that they were going to announce that they were going to the NCAA. There's been rumors. Michael Misa from Saginaw is going to, I think it was BU or Michigan. Last week, the one last player in the 24 draft from the CHL, Caden Lindstrom, he plays in Medicine Hat. There were rumors that came out that he's heading to the NCAA. Okay? But when we get back to first rounders again from last year's draft, you take a look, and we'll put this up. I mean, the CHL has 16 first rounders that have signed entry-level contracts. That means they're a credit to the CHL as far as development goes. The NCAA has 3 signed right now. Trevor Connolly from Providence just signed yesterday. And then there are 6 more. So what's that, 17-9?
Yep.
Go back to the numbers that are in the NHL right now. 47, let's call it 48% from the CHL, 29% from the NCAA. I'm not really good at math, guys, but I'll bet you that's pretty close to what those numbers are. And knowing that the first rounders are the guys that are always going to play in the NHL, knowing that there's 45 to 55 guys in any one birth year that are going to play in the NHL, we just talked about a whole bunch of them. There's not a lot of room for everybody else after that.
Yep.
So getting those first rounders is everything. Will any of these guys that are playing college hockey right now, even if they don't sign this year, are they going to go to the CHL? They're not going to the CHL. But it doesn't matter. They got to flip. If you take a look at the second round right now from last year's NHL draft, there are 3, 4, 5, 6 guys left in the CHL that the NCAA can flip. I mean, because you've had in the last 2 weeks where there's been some action as far as ELCs that we've been announcing on social media, the NHL has been signing these second round picks from the CHL. And of course, when you sign that entry level contract, you're not eligible for the NHL anymore, which is a joke because it's a pay to play league anyways in the NCAA, right? In any sport. So the CHL, it's going to be interesting to see what announcements. Now, I will say this. If Saginaw gets eliminated and Michael Misa ends up announcing that he's going to BU or BC or Michigan or wherever it is, it's going to stop everybody in their tracks. And that organically can change the narrative. And what happens after that if you get all of a sudden a Matthew Schaefer or a Porter Martone or a Roger McQueen out of Brandon or any of the other guys from the CHL that are rated in this year's first round draft? And by the way, the CHL is going to have a big NHL first round this year. What happens if the dominoes start falling organically?
Yeah.
I mean, well, it could happen. And that's what we're waiting for right now. And that's, guys, for everybody listening, that's kind of why we've kind of gone away really for the last, 4 or 5 weeks. It's not been a lot to report. Now there's going to be a lot to report. Second date we're watching, guys. Just interrupt anytime you want you to, guys. Nice sweater, by the way, Lucas.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're beautiful tonight. The national development team, they had their tryouts. I think it was March 19th to the 23rd. I think they announced their team coming up here very shortly. Traditionally, they've announced it the second week in April. I've been talking to some people who know the 09 market, I believe it is, in America. And I asked them for who are the best 9 forwards, who are the best 4 defensemen, and who's the best goalie. So, we're talking 14 hockey players there. It'll be interesting if any of those 14 end up in the CHL. That'll be a real telltale sign right there. And we'll have that information here very shortly. March 31st to May 14th is the transfer portal. Lucas, we need to get, the transfer portal, the portal is filling up really quickly.
Yep.
And our clean sheet expert, we need to get that up there on the Dan K website, so people can find out who is actually in college hockey entering the portal. And what you're going to see mainly from the portal entrance are people whose stats aren't very good. 90% of them, it just didn't work out at the school because they probably were not counted on to be big contributors at the program that they went to. But you're going to see some numbers in there that are leading scorer numbers on some of the weaker teams in Division I hockey. And it's interesting to go through and kind of peg those 10 to 20 players and see what big dogs or blue bloods they end up with.
I mean, with the transfer portal, there's always going to be a reshuffling, right? It's the top guys from lower schools will move, and maybe the bottom guys or the healthy scratches from top schools will move down, right? And the question, at least in the hockey world, is whether it's an equal exchange of value. We'll find out, right? Whether you're the top six from a lower team and the healthy scratch from a top team, right? Are you essentially the same player? But I do think that the transfer portal gets a bit of a bad rap. We've obviously talked about it, but I think it's deserved in some ways and not deserved in others. We'll see. I think it's going to be tough to keep up with, that's for sure. And we keep referencing the speed at which things are happening. That's the hardest part. It's not being done on like a Monday morning. If you look Monday morning, by Monday evening, it could be very different.
The transfer portal, the way that it is right now, is total insanity. It is every player is a free agent at the end of the year. I know we talked about this before we came on air, but I saw yesterday what I consider to be a blue blood in basketball. There was a movie called Hoosiers, and the Indiana Hoosiers basketball team, either through graduation or the portal, lost every one of their players right now. They have no players for next year. That is insanity. There is no professional league. And the NCAA, at whatever sport you want to call it now, is professional sports. Nobody allows free agency after every year. This is nutso. I don't know how these coaches are doing it. They recruit a player to come in, and you have to continue to recruit him. How do you hold anybody accountable? Don't get me going. The portal is bullshit.
And the biggest problem is this. The biggest problem with it right now, I'm an advocate for the player time and time again. I'm all about it, right? Everything we do in junior hockey, everything we do down to youth hockey, the jokes we make on April Fool's Day. It's about advocating for players' rights, things, this, that, and the other thing. But it's gotten past the point of actually being beneficial to players now, because the problem is this. You've put young men and women in a position now that you are making the wrong decision by not entering the transfer portal every year, right? You never know if your coach is jumping. You never know if the money's going to be greener on the other side than it is where you are now, or if no money's going to be where you are at all. And now with schools dropping to D3 or dropping to D2 or whatever's going on in this new world, or moving conferences and your schedules are changing, you're almost incorrect if you're at the Division I level and stay pat with a team. Look at Carson Beck in football. What better job is there right now in the last 5 years in terms of success of team than starting quarterback for the University of Georgia Bulldogs? Okay, and that is a job that Carson Beck had locked up. We all saw his backup try to throw passes when he got hurt and had to miss a big game, right? We saw that. This guy's job was the safest job on the planet. And he left for the University of Miami that hasn't competed since Jimmy Johnson was running on and off of a football field coaching Miami against Notre Dame. Like, this is the world we live in now, and that's the problem. The problem is not the idea of players' rights. The problem is not players making money. The problem is just removing every rule, every regulation, and adults that need to be protecting student athletes. Until we change that word, we stop using it, those adults have left the room, and it's happening in college. It's an epidemic in junior hockey. It's an epidemic in every level of this game. The adults have thrown everything out the window, and as long as the check clears, no one cares.
Last word on the portal. Just once, and I know, Lucas, you're an educator. Just once, I want to hear somebody say, I'm leaving the school that I'm at right now because I believe that I can get a better education at another institution and still play hockey there. Has anybody ever heard that?
No.
Right. I mean, student athlete. Okay, enough on the portal. CHL drafts. So they're coming up. The OHL draft is either this weekend or next weekend. And then the Quebec League is last after the Memorial Cup. Here's what you have to watch for in the CHL drafts. Last year, Americans drafted in the CHL drafts. There was 1 in the WHL, there was 2 in the OHL, and there was 0 in the Q. As far as, let me qualify that, in the first 3 rounds. So in the first 3 rounds, 1 in the WHL, 2 in the OHL, 0 in the Q. And the reason for that is those teams in those 3 leagues, their first 3 round draft choices, they're everything to them. They have to make sure that a kid is going to report. So if you start seeing players, American players, drafted in the first 3 rounds in any significant numbers, you know that our prediction of Americans running to the CHL is coming true. Watch for that in the CHL drafts. You want to make predictions? Anybody want to make predictions?
Let's go for it. What do you got?
I'm going to predict in the queue, there's going to be 2 to 4. Mark these down, Lucas.
Marking them.
We need a
Locked
report card. We need a report card. I'm going to say 2 to 4 in the first 3 rounds, Americans. In the Western League, I'm going to say 3 to 5. And in the O, I'm going to say 4 to 6. So we'll see.
Interesting.
The next, I mean, we could be totally wrong on this. And I don't think we are. We'll find out. The USHL draft, futures draft, I believe, is May the 5th. Here's what we need to watch for there. We've been predicting there's going to be no more Powers and no more Celebrinis going to the USHL. In the USHL, you can give up your first round pick and tender a player. So in essence, if you're a team with resources, define that any way that you want, you can use you can tender 2 players and give up your first 2 picks. Everybody should do that.
Yeah.
Because you step right, the example that I know is if you're in the Ontario Hockey League and the London Knights were allowed to do this, they would get what would be the first and second pick in the OHL draft every year. And nobody would beat them. So it'll be interesting to see who gets tendered. Hey, if one of these 14 players, American players that I was talking about later, or a couple underneath them, end up going to the USHL, then maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think so. One USHL coach told me, and we can watch this, you're going to see more Europeans drafted in the futures draft. Because you're not going to be able to get your hands on the Americans that you used to be able to get your hands on because they're going to the CHL. Again, it's the fun time now. It's the fun season. We're going to be able to watch all of this. And finally, from a date standpoint, the National Hockey League draft is June 27th and 28th. At that point in time, the tracking that we're doing for the 2024 draft, we will add the 2025 draft. We'll take away that top 105 players that Central Scouting has rated in those positions for the North American players. We'll fill it with the actual draft, and we'll start watching who's signing entry-level contracts. And if it happens like it did last year, where all of the CHL players, because I said they're going to have a big year in the NHL draft this year, if they start signing ELCs right away, the NCAA can't get their hands on them. And what was that about Chateaubriand and Lobster before? It's going to be beans and hot dogs, guys, for the rest. So much happening now that you two guys are off vacation and actually back to work, that we're going to be able to cover. Shouldn't you guys be ashamed of yourself for the time you took off?
Look,
and just left me all by myself like this?
You got us full time now. I've continued to say I will work one extra day for every time I get to go to Cabot Citrus Farms instead of Peter. That's what I said. Every time I get to go to the golf course, I'm in. I've seen zero golf. I get nothing. I'm getting peanuts over here. I'm swinging it.
I remember a time
renting Ram golf clubs in New Jersey right now when it's 40 degrees outside.
I remember a time when Dan and I were shipped in summer sausages by the dozen for our work for Bob Turro. Not a single summer sausage has been
Zero
received.
summer sausages this holiday. See,
it's over.
No cheddar cheese.
No more summer sausages.
I've got some really, it's maple syrup time. Even though I'm in Florida, it's maple syrup time in Canada right now. Problem is, it's hard to get it across the border right now.
Well, we got a Michigan hookup for maple syrup that we might be able to get you.
If I can get it across the border, you might have some maple syrup. Let's get serious. We got to talk about a couple of other things. The NHL had their Board of Governors meetings in Palm Beach a couple weeks ago, and a hockey insider that I talked to and a couple of NHL people, they say what is coming for sure is early admittance for CHL players who are draft choices, who are not ready to play in the NHL, to allow them as 18 or 19-year-olds to play in the AHL. They didn't have the details. It's been talked about forever and ever and ever. The reason the NHL has never done that to the CHL is because they didn't want to rip those superstars out of the CHL. But if it's true that they're going to have an influx of talent, and there's more NHL general managers who are saying, listen, that 18-year-old this year who's dominating, here's a perfect example. We talked about Michael Misa. Michael Misa won the OHL scoring championship this year as an 18-year-old. He's an incredibly talented hockey player. He was deemed an exceptional player by Hockey Canada and allowed to play early in the Ontario Hockey League. One of, I don't know what the number is, 9 over the history to be able to play early since they started the exceptional player rule. What value is it if he's not ready to play in the NHL, which there is a question mark whether he is, because he's not a super huge guy, and it's a tough league to play in, and you don't want to damage somebody by accelerating him too fast. Well, what I hear is he's going to be able to play in the AHL next year. Now, the question is, for somebody like that, does he play in the AHL and make $70,000 a year? Or does he go to a blue blood and get $70,000 plus X a year? These are the interesting stories that are going to play out over the course of the next couple of months. And there's more just like Michael Misa. So how the NHL is going to play into this, we don't know. The last time we met, and I'm rubbing it in now, before you guys went on vacation, we were talking about Youngstown and Muskegon going to the Ontario Hockey League.
Yep.
That stopped. I'm told by people, because it's very tight-lipped right now, that it was stopped by the National Hockey League. And I won't start dropping names as far as who told me that or who got involved, but it was the NHL. And the word on the street is, guys, that's something that I never thought would ever happen. Is that the USHL may be able to play for the Memorial Cup and maybe the fourth major junior league. Now, I have a hard time believing that somebody who was going to pay $15 or $16 million to get into the OHL is now basically going to be able to get in for free because the NHL, kind of steps up and says, no, you're not going to decimate the USHL. Now, why would that happen? Well, why would they get in for free? There's $9 million that the NHL is giving to the CHL. Maybe the NHL says, you know what? Don't do what we say. That $9 million goes away. You don't need it anymore anyways. You're a big-time league. You don't need it anymore because it looks like you're going to save a lot of money, just like Hockey 101 predicted, on not paying educational packages over the course of the next 20 years.
Yep.
So something's going to happen on that end, and we're going to find that out as well. Last thing I want to talk about before we get into the final topic, Dan, is an explanation of these updates that we're giving on entry-level contract signings. And if you go to Dan K website, you're going to find the battleground of the 17 and 18-year-old player that we say has to be flipped here, where they're playing now, et cetera, et cetera. But you're also going to see a count of who is signed ELCs and the count for the leagues. How many does the CHL have? How many does the NCAA have? How many does Europe have? And I'll just give you the count right now. Wrong spreadsheet. The count right now is 39 have signed entry-level contracts from the CHL. This is from the 2024 draft. 39 have signed from the CHL. 31 have signed from Europe. And 3 have signed from the NCAA. Now there'll be more NCAA signings, but they're not going to catch the CHL. So what we're going to do for all of the viewers, whether the pod or just our articles or just our updates, the 2024 and once it happens, the 2025 draft, we're going to combine them all together and we're going to keep track of where these players have signed their entry-level contracts from, what league, what development league, and we'll have a score. And I can tell you, if one league is way above another league, 5 years from now, the makeup of the National Hockey League will be represented basically exactly to those numbers.
It won't be an exact predictor, but I can almost guarantee you it will be accurate. Again, when things move fast, the data settles quickly, right? If you have a long arc of trends, things kind of get shuffled around very slowly, finally coalescing into a data line. When things move fast, when there's a move or get off the pot mentality, when people, especially in the hockey world, and our parents of players know this, when there's a mentality of, if I don't do it right, my career is over, that's instilled at a very young age, people are going to make the moves that are going to benefit them the most. And once the first couple of, as you said, Bob, dominoes start to fall, people are going to start moving pretty quick.
Here's a domino. U Sport has changed a rule to allow players who are playing pro hockey to come back and play in U Sport. They've made an adjustment. I mean, if I could buy a ticket and just be in every meeting at the NCAA coaches convention in Naples, I mean, I'd love to hear what's going on there. We'll find out. As we said earlier, CHL is prepared for this. Kind of a slap down by the NHL, it sounds like, for those two teams coming to the OHL. So we'll have to monitor that. But the NCAA or Division I hockey, what's their plan? We're waiting. We've been waiting since November the 7th when the announcement was made. Haven't heard it yet. What else? Anything else?
Outside of that, Bob, I think one thing we talked about a little bit before we got on the air that we talked about kind of closing out today's show, and we kind of teased it while we were talking earlier, is how basketball, college basketball right now, might be paving a way towards some transfer portal calm down, some tamping down of the transfer portal, some potential business models that hockey could use to grow its awareness at the NCAA level and a potential moneymaker for someone out there that wants to put this thing together. How about the CBC, the College Basketball Crown? If I sound crazy, you think someone's in a throne right now, they're not. Okay, what it is a 16-team basketball tournament that was created by the Big Ten, Big 12, and Big East, along with Fox Sports, as a way to A, combat transfer portal loss in its middle to low range teams as the season came to a conclusion and March Madness got underway. 2, to keep teams in its conference rather than losing them to the SEC and ACC, which make up the entirety of the current Final Four in March Madness. And 3, to create a tournament that can allow players to make nil money by winning or performing well in it, keeping them performing through the end of the NCAA campaign and keeping all teams on the same trajectory as the final buzzer sounds on the March Madness championship game this upcoming Monday. The College Basketball Crown, 16 teams, gentlemen, 2 automatic bids for the Big East, the Big Ten, and the Big 12, who founded this tournament, and then 10 at-large bids. Some of the teams playing in this, 14-19 DePaul, 16-16 Utah, 500 Arizona State team, just above 500 Cincinnati and UCF team from the Big 12. These are big school names in some cases, but not big school performances. But what they have found is players have stuck around because you win the championship, your team splits $300,000 in NIL dollars to all of those players who stuck around to play or stuck around to be on the official roster. $100,000 to each semifinalist team. So they're giving out a lot of NIL money. Fox is backing this thing, finding the sponsors for it. Bob, hockey, can you give me some of those blue bloods that aren't playing in the final 16 of the NCAA tournament right now, that could be playing in the Dan K Show crown title right now on ESPN, Fox, some channel somewhere?
Let's go right to the final. How about Notre Dame versus Michigan? How about North Dakota versus Michigan? I mean, those are pretty big schools. I don't know who the fourth one is off the top of my head. But listen, basketball's way bigger. I mean, it's just a revenue generator for the NCAA. But it's going to be ideas like this that are going to be outside the loop. Like, what could happen? As I said earlier, you could have an expanded Big Ten in hockey. And you could have the best of the rest. And then you could have a bunch of teams that drop down to D3, or maybe they're just at a lower level of D1 and they get one bid into the tournament. Like, I don't know. Where is Roy Kramer?
Well, I mean, one of the great motivators is, of course, sticking around so you could play for a suitcase full of cash. I mean, NIL money. But you know what? At least I applaud the effort, right? In the absence of greater responsibilities being taken by adults in the room, throw a bunch of cash at the problem. I mean, it's obviously a great revenue generator, right?
Here's the
But
biggest thing. Here's the biggest thing. You're looking at NCAA hockey. It was extremely difficult for the layman to even find an NCAA tournament hockey game
that's true.
90% of the time. There's only 16 teams. This isn't 68 teams playing over 27 days. We needed 4 days of ESPN's attention for the biggest spotlight in NCAA hockey, and you couldn't get their attention, right? So maybe this is drastic times. Maybe this is drastic measures, whether you're talking nil, whether you're talking competing with the CHL, and maybe it takes some people for once being a bit creative, thinking outside the box, putting together some nil money, because I can guarantee you a four-team tournament with the likes of Michigan, Wisconsin, Notre Dame playing in Vegas where the Golden Knights play with a laser light show. And look, a lot of gambling money on the line that's going to raise funds and NIL money for these players. Maybe that's what finally puts college hockey on the map in this country and stops making it play second fiddle to everything else in collegiate and professional athletics.
I do know that the NCAA Frozen Four is going to be shown live on TSN or Sportsnet up in Canada for the first time.
It's huge.
I mean, that is big. And for as much as we come down on the lack of, for as much as we come down on the NCAA not controlling the narrative, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Whoever did that and arranged that for the NCAA, kudos to them.
Yep.
Now, listen, it may have been TSN or Sportsnet that went to them and said, hey, what's it going to cost us to air this? But if you do go to a Frozen Four, I could tell you it, in my opinion, it's bigger and better than the Memorial Cup. You got a packed house of 18,000 people in an NHL arena compared to Memorial Cup, where in Saginaw last year you had, 4,500 or 5,000 people in the arena. There's so much potential in the NCAA. If they just got whoever the next Celebrini and Power and all the rest of them behind them, if they just got them into the league. We'll find out.
Even look at a team like Minnesota, right? They get eliminated and they had four guys that were immediately they're going to the NHL. And then they had a bunch of their other guys leave where they're almost going to have to start from scratch next year, right? So it does speak to Dan's point about, whether it is a team that gets eliminated early or whether it's teams that don't make the tournament at all, however you want to do the makeup, it does give those guys a little bit of an extra motivation to stick around and maybe squeeze a little bit more airtime out of guys before they inevitably go to the NHL. But it gives you one more shot at them from the college ranks.
At the end of the day, bowl games still exist to solve this problem in college football. The NCAA,
Update.
CBI, and the Crown, and all these tournaments, they still exist to help this issue. There may not be solutions to the issue, but they are things that have been created to try to put some caps on some of these pipelines that these players are running through to get away from organizations. It's a possibility. Again, takes creativity. And most importantly, Bob, like most things in this world, it takes money to get it done. And that's what it's going to need. It's going to need somebody with the big bucks. And I think that, guys, wraps up this week's episode. I think we've argued about the portal. We've talked about Crown basketball. We've talked about all kinds of things. We've talked about Chateaubriand. Lucas, why don't you take the people to the close? I think you can close it out better than anybody. Grab a little bit of vino, grab your Chateaubriand, and tell the folks what they're going to catch next time on.
Just
beautiful.
grab a handful of Chateaubriand from out the fridge, and
I don't know what any
just
of this stuff is. I ate mac and cheese as a kid, all right? I didn't grow up on Chateaubriand in Quebecois like you gentlemen.
well, I do want to thank everybody for tuning into this episode. The updates are going to arrive more frequently. Bob Turo has commanded a faster update cycle from you boys off of our
We're gonna be
vacation.
better, we promise.
We are going to give it to him. And of course, we would like to thank Bob Turo for committing nearly $250,000 to help jumpstart the hockey version of the Crown tournament. I mean, Bob, what a selfless, as always.
Well, Bob
From
was
summer
at Cabot
sausages to
Farms.
$250,000.
His wonderful
Get-
wife let me in. I grabbed the checkbook. We are
Whoa.
excited and
Get to the Dan K website. Get that up there. Get that Dan K website address up there. You're going to be able to follow all the ALC news. Okay, you're going to be able to find out everything you want to know about what we talk about. I'm going to rap. I am rapping, not you guys are rapping here. The Canadians came back and beat the Panthers in overtime. A big point for the Panthers because there's a three-way fight for that division. The Canadians, 2 big points for the final wild card. The Lightning have all but eliminated the Islanders and get 2 big points in that fight for the Atlantic Division. The Islanders are basically done. The Jackets beat the Predators 8-4, so the Jackets remain alive. And those Detroit Red Wings are up 1-0 on the Blues, scraping to try and stay alive for the last 2 weeks. Can't wait for it, guys. Have a good night.
It's gonna rain.